Imagine paying thousands in HOA fees, and then, watching your own HOA call the cops on your family vineyard at dawn. What would you do if a smiling HOA president tried to film the moment your livelihood got shut down? Picture this. First light over Autumn Ridge Valley. The kind of soft gold that makes the vines look like they're breathing. Mist slides low and quiet between the rows while I clip back tender shoots. Coffee steaming in the chill. Then I hear its sirens faint at first. A thin whine, cutting through birdsong like a bad memory. Boots crunch on fallen leaves. Radios hiss. And there she is, Karen Whitaker, the HOA president of Maple Grove, standing tall as a statue at the fence line. Phone up. Red nails, tapping the case like a metronome. She thinks this is her moment. Name's Ethan Cole. A few years back, I wore suits that cost more than some folks' trucks, and billed hours in a glass tower in San Francisco. Corporate real estate law. Long hours. Short gratitude. Then, my marriage cracked apart like thin ice. My ex fell for my law partner, yeah? I know. Real original. And the settlement cleaned me out faster than a slot machine on a bad streak. About the same time, my granddad passed and left me Cole Family Vineyards, 40 acres of stubborn, sunburned ground tucked into Autumn Ridge. He'd planted his first vines in the early 1960s. Back when this valley was neighbors who waved and fences you fixed yourself. I moved into the old farmhouse that creaks when the wind changes. My shepherd, Ranger, acts like every delivery truck is a personal threat to our democracy. But waking up to dew on grape leaves, after years of office backstabbing, that felt like actual therapy. The place needed work. Irrigation older than a dusty history book. Tractors with more rust than paint. But it was our soil, memory, and a name tied to the land. And then, well, Karen happened. Karen Whitaker is what you'd get if a neighborhood watch group learned PowerPoint and decided to run for queen. Former council candidate, lost twice, and now the self-crowned empress of Maple Grove. HOA, hair sprayed to hurricane strength. White SUV that's never seen a dirt road. She calls it community standards. I call it a hobby with a badge. The spark was a fence. I replaced a collapsed section on the east property line, basic agricultural mesh, tall enough to tell the deer. Bridal parties to stay in their lane. Morning sun. Post-hole digger. Sweat in the dust. I hear a car door slam like a gavel. Karen strides over in heels that weren't designed for gravel, clutching a clipboard like a subpoena. That fence violates our aesthetics, she says, smiling like a dentist with a drill. Ma'am, I answer, leaning on my shovel. This farm's been here since before the Beatles went electric. Your subdivision was orchards until, what? A handful of years ago. She sniffs. Rules are rules. This is a residential neighborhood now. We have standards. The word residential drips like acid on old barnwood. She turns on her heel and marches off. The sound of the SUV door thudding shut, echoing down the row. 2 days later, a certified letter lands in my mailbox like a dead fish. Cease and desist. Unpermitted structures. Alleged zoning violations. Threat of daily fines, $500 a day, plus further action. She copied the county, my bank, and the local paper. Not a complaint, a campaign. Here's what Karen didn't know. I'd spent more than a decade untangling exactly this kind of real estate mess. My old mentor used to say, "When they bury you in paper, bury them back deeper." I called my friend Jake Miller, an environmental attorney who works cheap when farms are getting squeezed. "Buddy," he laughed. "Sounds like somebody poked a sleeping bear." Ranger put his head on my knee like he agreed. I dug into Granddad's filing cabinet dust, coffee, and a lifetime of receipts. In a folder marked "Keep Forever," I hit pay dirt, the original deed, dated early 1962, with perpetual farming rights baked right in. Agricultural exemptions that outrank neighborhood ticky-tack rules. I drafted a letter as polite as church on Sunday and twice as sharp. Attached copies of the deed, the exemptions, a short education on rural zoning, and mailed it to everyone. Karen had CC'd, plus the paper editor, who probably expected gossip and got a legal lesson instead. 2 mornings after that, County Inspector Ruiz shows up. Nice guy. Apologizes while the breeze rattles the vines. Anonymous tip about unpermitted buildings. He says, anonymous. Right. He spends hours checking everything. The old barn grandfathered. Equipment shed built to code in the late 1990s. Root cellar. Solid. He signs off and, under his breath, says, "Your ag exemption is rock solid. Whoever filed that complaint doesn't know rural law." And that's when I realize this isn't about fences. It's a siege. And Karen just fired the first artillery round. Within a week, Maple Grove called an emergency board meeting about community beautification. Subtle as a sledgehammer, I showed up. The community center smelled like industrial cleaner and nervous coffee. Maybe 30 homeowners sat in folding chairs. Faces doing that hostage look folks get when they'd rather be anywhere else. Karen presided at the front table. 2 board members flanked her, nodding like bobbleheads. She clicked through slides about neighborhood character and protecting our investments. Corporate buzzwords dressed up like common sense. Then she produced a petition claiming my commercial agricultural operation was dragging down property values. You'd think I was running a tire fire, not fermenting Pinot. But then something shifted. 3 older residents stood up, people who knew this valley when it was still dirt under boots. "Ethan's family has been here longer than any of us," said Mrs. Patterson. Voice steady as steel. "His vines are the best thing about living near Autumn Ridge." For a heartbeat, Karen's smile cracked. Then she tabled the topic for legal review. Eyes flicking to a man in a tailored suit near the wall, expensive briefcase. The whole billable hour aura. Walking out, gravel muttering under my boots. I felt that old courtroom electricity. They had hired real legal firepower, which meant there was more money and motive behind this than a fussy fence. The next move wasn't legal. It was social. A Facebook group popped up. Concerned Neighbors of Autumn Ridge. Careful language. Cropped photos. My tractor shot from an angle that made it look like a rusted war machine. Posts about increased traffic and flies. Rumors that my events went late. That guests drove drunk. That the farm was a fire hazard. None of it true. But fear, you know, travels faster than facts. That week, I walked into Valley First Bank and felt the temperature drop. Janet, who'd handled my granddad's accounts since forever, suddenly needed further documentation to extend a routine equipment line. Her smile was brittle. Her eyes kept flicking to her monitor. Like a pop-up was telling her, I'd turned into a risk overnight. I went home and pulled public records. What I found turned my coffee bitter. Karen's husband, Brad Whitaker, local developer and lifelong fan of beige, owned more land than anyone realized. I traced shell companies buying up agricultural parcels for years. The math was ugly. Farmland sells low. Rezone it residential, and you multiply it 5 times. 6 times. More. My 40 acres represented a multi-million-dollar windfall if they could grind me into selling. I called Jake. Classic land squeeze. He said, they've run this play in county after county. Most farmers don't have a lawyer on their side. So they fold. Next, I hired a surveyor and ordered a full title search. Back to when this valley was cattle and common sense. 3 days later he calls, laughing like he's found buried treasure. Turns out our boundary extends 50 feet into what are now 3 Maple Grove backyards. Granddad had granted temporary construction easements way back, never sold the dirt. Even better. A utility easement snakes through the subdivision, giving me legal access for water, power, and service vehicles. In plain English, they can't block me without blocking themselves. Karen didn't slow down. She staged a safety meeting, waving petitions that looked like they'd all been signed by the same hand. She warned about drunk drivers and chemical exposure, as if fermentation was a supervillain origin story. I sat in back, bit my tongue, and watched her tell on herself. Panic shines through makeup if you know where to look. She was losing control of the narrative, and it made her sloppy. That's when the thick envelope hit my mailbox. Fancy letterhead. Threats dressed as Latin. A cease and desist from Whitaker and Fox, not Jake's shop, claiming a dozen municipal violations. Noise. Traffic. Use. You name it. 72 hours to shut down, or face a lawsuit big enough to sink me. The timing was perfect, peak season. Thin cash. Heavy commitments. I stared at that letter at my kitchen table. Ranger snoring at my feet. And I could almost feel the trap they thought they were closing. I was supposed to panic, to fold, to sell cheap. I drove to the courthouse instead. Our county's records live in basements that smell like paper and time. Fluorescent lights hum. Old drawers stick. I dug through maps, deeds, and permits until my back barked. And then, there it was. A designation from the late 1980s, listing Autumn Ridge as a historic agricultural district. Legal teeth. Any development within a couple miles of heritage vineyards requires environmental impact studies. Not recommendations. Requirements. So I cross-checked. Permit by permit. Subdivision by subdivision. You ever watch dominoes fall? Brad's projects? Stamped. Sold. And Celebrated had skipped those studies. All of them. Buyers thought they were purchasing clean paper. They were buying question marks. I called Jake. He whistled. That's not just a civil problem. That's fraud. Mail. Wire. Maybe conspiracy. Ethan. This is bigger than your fence. From then on, we documented everything. Cameras on the drive. Logs of calls. Copies of every letter. We weren't just protecting a farm anymore. We were building a record. Karen's campaign escalated. Anonymous complaints brought the fire marshal on my busiest weekend. Health department inspectors arrived after rumors of contamination. An audit notice landed like a thunderclap, suspicious timing. Don't you think? Meanwhile, Fake reviews sprouted online like mold, claiming my wine tasted like turpentine, that guests got sick, that brides cried in the parking lot. It was clumsy, but it still cost me bookings. Jake filed for a temporary restraining order to stop further harassment by HOA agents. 18 pages of relief. And a warning, violate this and meet contempt. Dr. Sarah Bennett, a soil scientist, Jake recommended. Walked my fields in a ball cap, eyes bright, taking notes, pulling cores, showing me how water moves, where slopes should be terraced, how careless grading upstream scours the land, what those subdivisions did, she said softly. It will take a decade to heal. Miguel Santos, a local pastor who organizes farm worker families, sat at my table the next morning, big hands wrapped around a chipped mug. Brother, he said, this valley deserves better than fear. There's people who think money lets them eat the future. We don't let them. He knew elders. He knew history. He knew how to pack a town hall on short notice. The team formed almost by itself, Jake, on the legal spine. Sarah, on the science. Miguel, on the people. And me, well, I was the guy with skin in the game, and a head full of case law I thought I'd left behind. Ethan, Jake said, spreading spreadsheets like battle maps. These HOA ledgers smell wrong. He pointed to payments to contractors that didn't exist in state records. Shell vendors. Money washing through phony invoices. If HOA funds were used to finance harassment or illegal lobbying, that's embezzlement. And if Brad's companies are in the loop, well, then it's a party. Ethel, a courthouse clerk who's been wrangling paper since before I learned to drive, became our quiet sentinel. Honey, she'd say on the phone, voice like warm pie. Brad just pulled 3 more property files. Y'all keep your eyes open. She found a misfiled folder no one had seen in decades. Letters from state agencies warning about the heritage rules when the first subdivision was proposed. Warnings ignored. The picture sharpened. It wasn't one HOA gone cranky. It was a pressure system, social, legal, financial, built to squeeze old farms until they squeaked. Vineyards run on rhythms: pruning, tying, thinning, harvest. You live by seasons and sky, which made the vandalism feel personal. One gray morning, I found the main irrigation line sliced clean. Water hissing into the dirt like a wound. Whoever did it used real cutters and knew exactly where to cut for maximum hurt. Phone calls started hitting my wedding couples. Just a heads up. The anonymous voices said, that venue's unsafe. Chemical spill, last week. Pure fiction. But 3 couples canceled in 24 hours. That's real money for a small farm. We handed everything to the sheriff. And because we'd already been talking to state folks, to the feds too, I ain't sorry. I'm not an undercover kind of guy. But I learned quick how to save voicemails and how to keep my cool on recorded calls. Then Brad himself rolled up one foggy morning with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Ethan, he said, let's be reasonable. Sell me the land. I can make your problems go away. He put a number on it. Millions. Quick close. Non-disclosure. Clock's ticking, he added, like he was doing me a favor. I let the silence stretch until his face twitched. Brad, I finally said, you couldn't pay me enough to give you my grandfather's dirt. His jaw tightened. You have no idea who you're up against. What he didn't know was that a small device in my chest pocket was recording every word per instructions from a federal agent named Carter who had introduced himself after the audit notice landed. Patterns matter. Agent Carter had said, "Keep your cool, keep your records." Meanwhile, Karen's posts turned frantic. 20 times a day. Sometimes more. Conspiracies layered on conspiracies. She claimed my wine contained industrial solvents. She claimed the IRS was moments away from seizing the farm. She suggested I had friends in organized crime, which would have been news to me and Ranger. Who's afraid of the vacuum? Even her loyal followers started peeling off. It's hard to stay on a train that's obviously heading for a cliff. Jake filed whistleblower paperwork with the state attorney general. Sarah compiled an environmental report thick enough to stop a door. Miguel lined up families willing to testify how they'd been pressured to sell. And Ethel found the final piece, a memo showing a developer lobbyist had brushed off the heritage designations as old paper no one cares about. Careful, I thought. Old paper burns hottest when it finally catches. The county scheduled a mediation session at the town hall, supposedly to lower the temperature. Jake's smile said otherwise. They expect a handshake, he murmured. And they're gonna get a spotlight. He invited local media. The Attorney General's office sent observers. Folks who'd never set foot in a vineyard showed up early to get good seats. The room smelled like carpet cleaner and anticipation. Karen opened strong. The Greatest Hits Tour, rules are rules. Community standards. My illegal operation. The petition, she waved like holy writ. Brad played peacemaker, offering a fair market buyout to heal the division. It would have been convincing to anyone who hadn't seen the receipts. When they finished, I stood. "Thank you for your patience," I said, channeling my old courtroom cadence. This has been, if nothing else, educational. I walked through the agriculture first deed language, the heritage protections from the late 1980s, the survey lines that run right under a few Maple Grove decks. I laid out the missing environmental studies, the shell vendors and HOA books, the anonymous calls, the cut irrigation, the audit that arrived like clockwork after a flurry of posts. People shifted in their seats. A murmur rolled like wind through grass. I glanced to the back. Agent Carter and 2 marshals had slipped in. Quiet as fog. "And one more thing," I added, holding up a slim device. Some conversations were recorded under federal guidance. I clicked play on Brad's "Make Your Problems Go Away" sales pitch. The room went still. Then came the whispers. Then the cameras. Karen stood, voice cracking. "This is a smear. He's lying. He's a menace." Judge Wells, the retired jurist mediating the session, lifted a palm. "Miss Whitaker, sit." Her voice could cut stone. Agent Carter stepped forward. "We have warrants." Papers exchanged hands. A cameraman's light flared. Brad's attorneys scrambled to their feet, talking about rights and misunderstandings. The marshals waited, patient as gravity. My hands shook, not with fear, but with the slow, clean rush of something like relief. For months I'd held my breath, while the valley's worst instincts tried to suffocate the best parts of it. Now the air moved again. Ranger was back at the farmhouse, probably drooling on the couch, I thought. Not for the first time. How lucky it was that dogs can't read Facebook. Change doesn't happen in a single headline. It happens in hearings. filings, and, honestly, unglamorous grunt work. The days after the town hall felt like harvest long. Sticky, exhausting, necessary. State investigators swarmed files. County staff rediscovered backbone. Homeowners started asking uncomfortable questions about who had signed what and when. Karen's glossy confidence cracked wide. She picked fights in grocery aisles, shouted at council meetings, posted rants at 2 in the morning about shadowy enemies. Her friends faded like paint in the sun. The HOA called a special election. Neighbors who'd nodded politely before now spoke with their chins up. On the farm, we rebuilt what had been cut. Volunteers showed up with work gloves and casseroles. Miguel organized a community day fence mending on the hill. Kids planting a row of sunflowers by the farm stand. A pot of chili big enough to feed a platoon. You could smell wood smoke and cinnamon and, I swear, something like hope. Sarah and I spent evenings over maps, her fingers tracing contour lines. My mind tripping over the way she said loam, like it was a love letter. We argued about drainage and laughed about everything else. I mean, who knew soil science could be charming? Jake kept the legal front hot. Injunctions froze any new phases of Brad's developments. Title insurers started calling homeowners with pointed questions. The bank, that once looked at me like I was radioactive, suddenly returned my messages. Nothing clears the air like a subpoena with teeth. Ethel got fan mail. She'd testify later that she was just doing her job. Maybe. But there's doing your job. And there's doing it with a backbone. I slept better. Not perfect. The mind replays threats in the dark. But I started waking to birds. Not to dread. Months passed. Hearings turned into charges. Fraud. Permitting violations. A tidy stack of we didn't know defenses toppled once email surfaced. Brad's empire had been built on skipping steps and bullying anyone who noticed. It takes time to prove deliberate intent. But the paper trail didn't lie. And the community lord changed. The HOA voted Karen out, then voted to dissolve altogether. Without the constant hum of punitive enforcement, people remembered how to talk like neighbors again. Fences got lower. Porches got friendlier. Mrs. Patterson started a weekly coffee hour under the oaks. We launched the Autumn Ridge Heritage Foundation with settlement funds, scholarships for ag kids, field trips that let school children stick their hands in the soil and watch ladybugs work. We built a small museum in the old packing shed, photographs of harvest from the 1960s. Hand tools worn smooth. A map with pins for every family that stewarded land here. The county adopted stronger protections. This time filed in the right drawers. Sarah helped write the language. Miguel rallied support. Jake made sure the commas lived where they should. Ethel cut the ribbon. Eyes shiny. I added a rescue mutt to Ranger's Patrol Scout, who has a nose for trouble and a talent for chewing only the shoes I actually like. The two of them race the sunset between rows while I walk shoulder to shoulder with Sarah, talking about cover crops and, sometimes, everything else. It felt finally like building instead of bracing. Sentencing day arrived on a bright morning that smelled like fresh-cut grass. The judge called Brad's scheme a calculated exploitation of families who anchor this valley. And the room went quiet, the way a church does when someone tells the truth out loud. Time behind bars. Fines. Restitution. A lifetime ban on permitting. Karen faced her own penalties, lighter. Sure. But heavy enough to teach the lesson. Hubris never learns on its own. Afterward, Cameras waited outside. Reporters asked if I felt vindicated. I said I felt tired and grateful. Grateful for neighbors with spines. For clerks who care where the paper lives. For a mutt who snores loud enough to drown out worry on the worst nights. We drove home slow. Sunlight flashed through the oaks in a rhythm that felt like breath. At the farm gate, a hand-painted sign hung from twine. "We got your back." Somebody had left jars of jam and a note that said, in a shaky hand, "Don't let them pave the future." We didn't. We won't. The business didn't just survive. It bloomed. Press wrote the story as a parable: farm versus fraud, community versus greed, and tourists drove out to stand under the same sky where the sirens once wailed. Our wine sold out. The event barn booked seasons in advance. We hired 2 crews and paid them better than any spreadsheet said we could. Because the spreadsheets don't know what it feels like to put your hands in this soil and feel it answer. We converted one condemned model home from Brad's failed expansion into a classroom for soil health. Kids scribbled notes while Sarah translated science to wonder. Miguel hosted farm worker rights clinics there on Saturdays. Mrs. Patterson taught a canning workshop that had a wait list longer than the summer. If you're wondering about Karen, last I heard, she moved 2 counties over and took a job where clipboards still mean something. I wish her peace. Honestly, anger corrodes the person who carries it. She'll have to set that down herself. On summer evenings, we hold a community dinner between the rows. Long tables, string lights, bread torn by hand, the sound of people laughing without checking over their shoulders. If you've never heard that sound, come by. You'll understand why we fought. Not everything wrapped with a bow. There were appeals. There were insurance fights. There were nights I stared at the ceiling and counted worries instead of sheep. But there were also new baby vines taking hold where erosion used to run. Owls returning to nest in the oak by the lower block. And an old neighbor stopping me at the feed store to say, "Didn't think we could do it. Guess I was wrong." A network of farmers from other states started calling. Same story. Different zip codes. Developers wearing different names. Same tactics. "What did you do first?" they'd ask. "What do we gather? Who do we call?" We shared the playbook document. Ally. Look backward through the paper until you find the promise someone made and someone else ignored. Law can be a cudgel. It can also be a shelter if you know where the posts are. Jake joked that I'd become the unofficial hotline for HOA drama with extra steps. He's right. And I'm okay with that. If our mess helps someone else keep the land that holds their family stories, then it's worth 1,000 late-night calls. Agent Carter swung by once. Off-duty. In a faded ball cap. We stood under the shade of the crush pad and didn't talk about the case. He patted Ranger, who pretended dignified indifference for about 3 seconds. Then rolled over for belly scratches. "You did good," Carter said. "Most folks don't keep their notes. You did." Maybe the best revenge isn't a headline or a sentence. Maybe it's just a full table where people raise glasses and say each other's names like blessings. I walk the rows at dusk. Boots brushing the dust. Palms grazing leaves warm from the day. Sarah clips a sample and holds it to the light, explaining how the color tells her the story of the soil's breath. Ranger and Scout thunder past like furry comets. Down the hill. The farmhouse windows glow. Sometimes my mind drifts back to that first morning. The sirens. The camera. The way Karen stood certain the world would bow to her clipboard. And I think about every tiny choice that followed: not selling cheap, not shouting first, not assuming I could muscle through alone. I think about the little mistakes I still make when I tell the story, like saying ain't when I mean isn't, or mixing my metaphors until Sarah snorts coffee. But this is how life sounds when you're living it. Not scripting it. Messy. Human. Real. If you're listening and you're in your own fight, hear me. You are not crazy. You are not small. Get your papers. Find your people. Tell the truth in a room where someone is taking notes. And if the first room doesn't listen, find another. The land keeps listening. The land remembers. So here's my ask. What would you do if an HOA tried to bulldoze your history because it didn't fit their aesthetic? Have you had a board fine you for a mailbox color? Or a truck parked in your own driveway? Drop your story in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Your words might be the rope someone else grabs when the current pulls hard. And if you're in Maple Grove or any Maple Grove, remember, the rules are supposed to make life better, not smaller. The second they stop doing that, they stop being worth the paper they're printed on. We're still here. The vines still breathe. The dogs still race the sunset. The valley still sings when the wind runs its fingers through the leaves. Knowledge is power. Shared knowledge is a revolution. Anyone else had a HOA do this to you?